this efficient message is something that obviously people care a lot about in their IT infrastructure. And I know that a lot of times people get very confused and say, look, it's all about cost. But I think you would argue different, right? I mean, I'm just curious, how would you, tell the crowd here, how would you define efficiency within your IT environment?
Yeah, so, cost is definitely part of it, but when you're working at petascale with limited resources, really efficiency is best described as, the ability to do more with less across the board, right? We actually use several Dell products in our tiers, including Ecologic, Compellent, MD, and Ocarina. And what's really exciting to me to see is creating this unification of all these different technologies, so that we don't have to have as much human power involved in actually taking care of our data. Automation, that's a key factor. Data tiering across different platforms, another key factor. And this is what I think that when you move into the world of really big data, you have to have these tool sets in order to be successful.
Awesome. Hey, so you hit on a couple things here. I think it's clear that we spend a lot of time talking about integration. So Jacob, I'm wondering, can you spend a little bit of time talking about, you heard him talking about how important it was to his IT organization. How big is the investment at Dell, or how focused is Dell on making sure integration is a key part of our DNA?
Yeah, I think this is a big part of what we do day to day is actually taking the IP that we have from the different acquisitions and actually creating a single, seamless storage infrastructure into which you can store your data. One of the key tenets that we look at when we take the IP and move it into our products is this notion of we want the infrastructure to manage the data and not data management be something that you have to do on a day-to-day basis. Right? We would rather have the infrastructure manage the data for you instead of you basically having to decide where a given piece of data sits or where data needs to be moved after a couple of days. What we would like, the ideal scenario is you define the policies on how you want the data to be managed, and based on the attributes of the data, we basically do the data management, which is we decide where the data needs to be moved based on the policies that we've set for the data. Now, these attributes that, based on which these policies act, can be something that you define. That's the end goal, is where as you create the data, you can come in and actually define the attributes for the policy attributes for the data. Or there's a lot of attributes as the system itself can understand. For example, a block storage device can understand what is the activity on a range of blocks, right? And it can decide where it needs to place blocks. In the file system, there's actually more visibility to some of the content that is there on the file system, so we can actually make decisions on where the data needs to be placed. And in terms of efficiency, I think the key idea is you want to actually put data that is appropriate on the right tier of storage. You don't want to place all the data on the most fastest tier of storage. There might be something like a home share where you might decide that, I don't want this on my SSD tier. I really want all this data to go directly on my slower tier of storage and not go to the fastest tier of storage. So the basic idea is we want you to be able to define policies, and then the system basically decides how it executes the policies, it places the data, and moves the data between the different tiers.
So you've heard a lot. You've heard some things from us. Did any of you guys have any? Can we prod you guys to ask some questions? Who wants to be the first one to take a shot at these guys? There we go. We got a taker.
So one of my biggest problems is trying to use best practices on how and where to place data. And other than me, can I?
We can hear it.
Okay. Other than me trying, because to me, everything in my PS series and my same storage is high availability. It's for high availability. When we're looking at moving data fluidly across, the infrastructure, I want to put my less data that I use the least frequent, rather than putting it on a different RAID array inside my SANs. I want to put it on less expensive disks completely, like the MD series. What are some of the best practices of actually moving data from the SANs to a less expensive storage solution And is that something that we want to incorporate in our overall infrastructure? I mean, do we want to stay away from the MD1000 altogether? Or can we keep everything inside the SAN, but still say we have inexpensive disks? But in essence, with the PS series, there's no such thing as inexpensive disks.
Yeah. So let me repeat the question for those who may not heard. Your question's around, look, I'm running a fairly, high availability, my data is very important, therefore I run it on the EqualLogic PS series today, but I do like the idea of being able to move it off to lower cost disk, but not just low cost disk in the PS series, but maybe even lower cost disk where in the MD series where I get a much better dollar per gig kind of ratio out of that system. And how would I be able to have a policy that migrates data to that? So Mike, you want to maybe take a shot at talking about some of our future roadmap stuff and how we want to address those kind of problems.
Yeah, sure. So this is something that we're having active discussions about right now. So today's tiering in our products, we have probably what's widely considered best of breed tiering, particularly in our compellant lineup. People are really enthusiastic about what the benefits they're seeing there. That's dynamic, sort of activity-based tiering. We find the hot, as Jacob was describing, the hot blocks, go into the fast disk and the cold blocks migrate downward, and it almost takes the flavor of caching. Now, the next step for us is looking at both policy-based migration that requires more in the way of content awareness and metadata that typically is deployed in and around file-based storage, so that our file system or our DX file archival platform that currently has that kind of a policy engine today. But the other next step is cross-platform in a SAN environment, and we're actively examining those scenarios right now and looking for ways to do that easily and efficiently. For example, if dedupe is implemented in your EqualLogic primary tier and you move it to the MD secondary tier, that data transfer can be deduplicated. But that's probably a future capability to go across platforms right now that we're just kind of specking out on our roadmap. And we probably, today we have some partner solutions that can help you with that kind of tiering, and that's maybe something that Dave can touch on as he talks about data management solutions using other people's IP to complement what we have today. But I think it's a very valid use case. And so, we take that back to our architects, and we're probably working on that right now for future release.
Yeah, I think that's a big focus for us. I think we hear a lot of customers saying, look, great that I can tier within the array, but I do have these lower cost, or maybe even a array that's not the latest and greatest, that I bought 3 years ago, and I want to retire it to a secondary storage system, and I want to use it as a tier. We get a lot, and we absolutely agree that is something we want to go do. It's easier to do on the file-based side. I think it's a little more complex when you're looking at just blocks, because it's ones and zeros within the array at that point. But we are looking at solutions that can allow us to do it both ways.
I just wanted.
Yeah, maybe you should add in maybe short term. What are the kind of things that you guys are looking at?
You guys hear me, right? This thing's working. One of the points to make is, as the technology evolves, and it'll continue to evolve, right? You don't get everything all at once. So we're definitely on that roadmap. But a very important part of not only integrating in current environments you have, right, but also as we move forward is leveraging the various ISP partners. We have a very, very large and very, very successful ISP development program. On the services side, one of the things that we do working with our product group is tying together those ISP solutions with the various product sets that we have and wrapping services around those to make sure that many of these things can be implemented today, especially in multi-vendor environments, because that's most of us probably live in a multi-vendor environment. And as the product set matures and those features become available, then more and more you get more tight integration versus interfaces that are through these ISV solutions. Some of those already exist today. You've probably seen a couple of discussions or a couple of different examples, most notably things like AvaPoint, where we're focused on data management and SharePoint integration, things like that, probably NKP and others. So I would suggest that for those that have great working relationships with account reps, talk to them about that, and we can help you identify the right tiering and the right solution for today's world as we move forward with the product line.
Any other questions?
Kind of extend on this question. The company I work for, GCSIT, we're an integrator, spot partner of the year, deliver a lot of EqualLogic and a lot of MD. And we've often worked with customers where we've just tried to make the cost of a PS4000 less expensive because they want to stay on one management platform. And if you've got Compellant, EqualLogic, and MD, as this gentleman does, there's 3 different interfaces, 3 different ways of doing things. That's expensive. Is there any notion of just trying to figure out how to make that third tier in Compellant, or, I mean, let's get rid of MD and have one platform and have that 50 cents a, as I saw on the board, get $1 and so on. Is there plans towards that sort of architecture maybe?
I think that's a great question, and I think that if you look at the way Compellant, EqualLogic, and Powerball are positioned today, they're kind of positioned for different needs in different market segments. However, I'm going to let Jacob talk a little bit about kind of, do we want to kind of have one big product line? Well, not necessarily, but we do want those product lines to complement one another, and we want them to work together. So we don't want a guy who buys all 3 products from us to feel like he's having to run 3 different management consoles, right? So I'm going to let Jacob comment a little bit, because we have a lot of kind of things on the board right now to go, either have you be able to manage a MD from a Compellant as a tier, or manage multiple environments through a single point kind of entry management interface. So Jacob, why don't you comment on that a little bit?
So I think if you looked at the tenants that Brett had put up earlier, there was a tenant called consistent ownership experience. That's not a topic for this, was not a topic for this panel, but I'll touch upon it. The basic idea is, today these are acquisitions that came with their own set of management tools and their workflows, and so every product is slightly different. And there is issues with it. I won't say issues, they don't interoperate because that's what the DNA was. The whole goal was to basically be a product by themselves. So our goal is, we don't want to basically fundamentally change the UI on everybody, because this is what you're used to. People who have already deployed EqualLogic, we don't want to come and say, hey, tomorrow you're going to be managed by Compellant UI, or if you have Compellant, you don't want to say tomorrow, hey, we're completely changing the management paradigm for you. So I think that's something that we have to look at, is we have to make sure that we can't completely change management paradigms on a given product and change it to something else. At the same time, the investigation we have right now is, this is something that we recognize, that consistent experience across Dell products now, this is all Dell storage, is something that's very important. So there is multiple levels of this. The first thing is, from a management standpoint, how do we ensure that there is some consistency of management? There is consistency of management, but this feels like it is all the same set of products. Consistent workflows, where for a given feature or a given set of tasks, the workflow is similar. I won't say it's consistent, it's not the same. Let's say consistent, because each one of these products brings different values, right? EqualLogic brings scale out, Compellant brings their tiering functionality and the ability to scale up to very large sizes. So these all bring different values, but you want to have, where it makes sense, you want to bring consistent experience in the workflows. The second part of it is, there is tiering is a case where there are cases where these products need to talk to each other, and that's another area of investigation. Is how do we get, for certain operations, how do we get these products to work together? How do you maybe tier from a Compellant to an EqualLogic? How do you potentially replicate from a Compellant to an EqualLogic? Because depending on the application, you might have deployed a Compellant or an EqualLogic. So it's really in 2 areas that we're looking at, is the management experience, and in operations, how do you actually get these things to work together? And then, I think at some point we'll talk about dedupe is also, as we implement optimization on the data, how do we actually move data between our products in their optimized form without having to rehydrate and change formats, right? If it's optimized on one platform, then it moves optimized to another platform.
Yeah, we're going to have a question back here.
Thank you. I just wanted to throw out a couple of thoughts and ask you a couple of questions that kind of bundle together. But you talk at one level about the criticality of the data, the importance of it to you. But then you also talk about things like, well, there are other factors to consider, like how frequently is that data accessed? So the world's not really binary, it's more like a four-way grid in that regard. Because something could be critical but not accessed frequently. And then the other thing is that it seems to me that there's something of a content delivery network factor to be considered in here, in that there's also the performance you need, and how quickly something needs to be delivered. And so, you might have something that's critical, and it may be accessed infrequently. And does the nature of the solutions you guys are talking about have the ability to put the data where it needs to be, given the balance between frequency of access and then the security that you need, factoring in that you have server-attached storage, you have storage within a server, you have network-attached storage, you might have a SAN 50 kilometers away. And then the other thing is, do your tools factor in predictability of flow? I mean, you know that maybe data is accessed infrequently, but all of a sudden on a Monday morning, there's a deluge of a certain application, deluge of data or data access for a certain application. So these are all the kind of factors that you basically kind of think about, and it's kind of a hornet's nest, but what it really comes down to is putting the right data in the right place at the right time in a secure way, in the cheapest way possible. And it seems to me that it would take a pretty tricky solution to factor in those four criteria and ways of thinking about storage that I just outlined. So I just would like to know your thoughts on those things.
That's a big question. I like that question. There's a lot in there, and I think the key is flexibility. Which one of you guys wants to kind of start on this one? Because I think all of us want to probably answer it.
I think I'll kind of get started on this one. I think when I said place data in the right place, there's also a value that you place to the data where you make a decision saying, the worst thing you can have is, let's say you have a single infrastructure where we do tiering between SSD to SAS to SATA, right? And you have 5,000 users who like to play MP3s, at their lunch break, and you're running Oracle production workload on that same system. And the last thing you want is that 5,000 users at lunchtime to bring your Oracle database to a crawl, because they're all competing for I/O cycles on your SSDs, right? So it's also there's a design element on where you decide where you want to initially place the data, and then you might decide that this particular data set is not that critical to the business that you don't mind taking a hit. We were talking yesterday about if you're in a hospital where you have a patient management system where you expect millisecond latency and you have medical X-ray files that the doctor pulls up, right, for viewing. In the case of that X-ray, a 2-second latency in pulling up an image might be okay. So you don't need to put it on the SSD and tier it to the SSD, while something that's more transactional, you want to get that low latency response. So there is a decision that the system makes, and there's a decision that, as part of the design of the infrastructure, you have to make on what data is important and what needs to get placed where, right? And from there, the system can take over, and that's why I said that's a data policy decision, and then the system takes over and says, well, within that rules that you've specified, how do we optimize the utilization of the storage?
But in that scenario, couldn't you also use vMotion?
In that scenario, couldn't you also use VMware's vMotion to transfer via low latency the workload that was crashing your Oracle database to kind of kick off that superfluous stuff like everybody during their lunch break, streaming files or whatever? Get it out of your environment, maybe out to a public or private cloud?
Yes, and that's why I said the issue is we don't need, the basic idea of tiering is if you basically said, this is MP3 files and this is home shares, you could make a decision that all your home shares just sit on the cloud anyway, right? The last thing you want to do is transfer terabytes of data every hour. Right? Your tiering policy should be smart enough that it doesn't actually try to move large amounts of data every hour. So this is given the tiers of data you have, there is a infrastructure design decision you have to make, which says, what is the important data and where does it get placed? Where is the initial placement of the data? Now, once you've defined those rules, you can also say, is it allowed to move up, or does it always move down, and then the system can take over and then optimize your infrastructure. I think you might, in terms of planning, you might want to add.
When I hear questions like this, when I think questions like this, the first thing that comes to my mind is the amount of intelligence you have to put into laying out your SAN. And you have to understand the applications. One of the things we don't mention very much when we start talking about auto-tiering and things like this is the temporal aspects of the use of data and when they come into play, and when you know they're going to come into play, right? Many of us have quarterly cycles, yearly cycles, and other time frames we know that data that we're not going to touch very often becomes really, really critical. I need it right now, not tomorrow, or wait for it to get restaged up the food chain. So, one of the things we try to focus on with our customers is to make sure all these various technologies, that you properly apply those technologies to lay out your SANs properly, take into account the processes that you'll be putting in place and your policies to make sure that they are complementary to each other. Technology is remarkable to do an awful lot of things, but you could also save yourself a lot of grief by really focusing on the design plan up front and also maintain that design.
And I think, just quickly, in the real world, what we're dealing with, with multi-terabyte data sets, it's really impractical, to try to do things, on the fly, if you will. You really have to have some kind of intelligence in the system. And I think, one of the things that Dell seems to be bringing to the table here is giving you some of the tool sets to actually make some of those intelligence decisions. Because, I think in the perfect world, you'd have almost like an AI routine that would just know what you wanted. Hey, I want all this genomic data on these SSDs at this point because I got a patient going through the pipeline. And you wouldn't have to interact with it at all. But unfortunately, it doesn't work like that because you may have 50 patients that you're working with, and when you collect those samples, it can change. So really, it's more of trying to augment some of the things that we know as human beings, hoping for the next iteration of intelligence.
We can only build policies as smart as we are, and it's one day.
Yeah.
Just a quick comment. We actually, to this specific example, have one of our other acquisitions called Insight One, right, is in the healthcare world. And one of the things that they have is the ability to have their archival and their disaster recovery systems connected such that when customers come in and they know they're going to be coming back for a re-exam and they need the images that are off-site in an Insight One facility, to restage and repopulate from those archives back to where the hospitals where these people are going to get their exams, to make sure their current records are there when they come in for their actual appointments, when that data wasn't there just the day before. So these capabilities already exist today.
Yeah, James, you've got a similar kind of situation. You guys keep all the data that you guys produce, as massive as it is, and you guys obviously have an archive kind of practice that you do to make sure that you can go back to this data later.
Yeah, it's it's really challenging dealing with a generation of about 2 terabytes of data a day. We found that our workflow consists of putting data out into a NAS environment initially, then pushing through Ocarina optimization into our back-end storage tier that then goes off to tape archive. And with the Ocarinas, we've seen we pushed about a petabyte of data through those, and we've actually only had to write about 400, 500 terabytes to tape. So, getting that optimization has really been key to try to keep our costs down, as well as some of the network congestion and going to the network attached tape device.
Other questions? We got one over here. One over here.
We got you guys warmed up now, right?
To that point with deduplication to tape, have you tested going, basically rehydrating and doing a restore?
Absolutely. We've actually done multi-terabyte restores after writing to tape, and there's no data left on spinning disk at all.
Have you done metrics on like a standard restore versus the process of rehydration? How much time that added?
Yeah, right now it's a fairly manual process, so it takes a fair amount of time. And this is part of the thing. I get back to the automation point, wanting to be able to do this stuff more transparently from the end user state. We talk about a single namespace file system as a good example of something that would be really useful in this, because right now we have different file systems, so we have to restore one place and then tell the user it's over there. It's just more complicated than I'd like it.
From a customer standpoint, that would be the gotcha you have to balance is, am I putting myself in a hole with deduplication, tiering? Same thing with tiering. I mean, if you have, like the gentleman back there was saying, if you have gigabytes of data on tier 2 or cheaper storage and all of a sudden something happens, they need that system up, how long does it take to go back up to tier 1 for performance to come online for the business need?
One of the things we just announced, day before yesterday, we just announced the Ocarina capabilities on our DX object store, right? So we have our compression technology actually running on our object store system, which is really designed around archive or big content management, or some people even use it for replacement and backup. And one of the things we've done is we've done fast compression, which basically is almost zero performance. There's minimal, but basically latency and your read-back performance about the same. And then there's best kind of dedupe, which means that we're going to compress it as much as possible. We're going to throw best algorithms at it, and it's a little bit more compute intensive, and there's a little bit more latency involved. Well, the trick is all of our ISVs or even file system pieces that write to that, we've actually built it in so that if you're going to use the best one, then you're aware of that. You respond well to that latency. It's built into your architecture, and there's no disruption for the end user. It may instead of a millisecond response time, it may take a half a second. But from an end user, he's not affected in any kind of disruptive way. So we are looking at ways to make sure that as we put these pieces together, that from the end user, it's clean. Right? If there is a delay, then it's minimized to the end user.
Is the dedupe inline or post-process?
It depends on what. I'll let Mike answer that. That's a good question.
It's an interesting question. So the most of the work that Ocarina did was focused on deep archival, multi-petabyte archives, and it's really focused on economics. Shrink everything as best as you possibly can. And that's not necessarily the best approach for, say, a backup workflow, where you're really focused on throughput for backup windows and restore. And so it turns out that for each of the different products that we have in our portfolio, and we are planning to implement data reduction in all of our platforms, we have different levels of CPU and RAM available to us. They're in different kinds of workflows with different performance and cost sensitivities. We have different levels of awareness of what's a file versus just opaque bits that are streaming by. Okay, and so we're tailoring the solution to each of these platforms. In some cases, it's dedupe only. In some cases, it's compression only. In some cases, it's both. In some cases, it's fast and inline. In some cases, it's slow and policy-based and post-process, and we're looking for every last opportunity to shrink stuff. So the individual designs are going to vary. They sort of have different personalities, but the thing that we're enforcing is a consistency in how data moves around. So there's kind of a contract between these platforms and say, hey, if I want to move a batch of data from here to a backup target or something like that, that the backup target can read those data formats and rehydrate or rearrange as necessary, so we don't have to reinflate the data every time it goes over the wire. And so, there's a couple tenets of our dedupe and compression capability. One is, in any apples-to-apples scenario, we think we're going to shrink better than any competitor in the industry. And that comes by virtue of having PhDs actively developing our own algorithms. The FAST algorithm you mentioned is something we just developed in the last 6 months or so. And there really hasn't been a lot of commercial research in compression and dedupe algorithms in the last few years, so we're doing that. But then the second piece is where we really are looking to optimize workflows. And obviously there are benefits if I'm doing wide area replication between facilities to minimize that use of bandwidth, and there's wide area acceleration kinds of technologies. Part of that is dedupe compression. We'll take advantage of that, but it's really important for cloud adoption too. If you're a small, medium-sized business and you have a 5 or 10 megabit connection, that can be really problematic doing any significant use of the cloud. So we're looking for ways to sort of embed those data movement, optimized data movement capabilities right into the platform. So to answer your question, inline dedupe, we have, we're actually working on this backup products now. They would be more inclined to use fast, inline, high-speed dedupe, whereas a product like the product we announced before yesterday, the DX File Archive, oriented around archive, typically has pretty good performance for the use cases it's going into. We would rather take extra CPU cycles and really work the content to get every last byte out of it. So that would be more of a post-process content-aware compression. We've got specialized compressors for DICOM images and oil and gas files and JPEGs, specialized image compressors and so forth. So yeah, it's pretty interesting stack of technology.
Okay, one last question to that. So you're talking about EqualLogic and Compellent would both be able to dedupe with a single product. Is each one going to have its own dedupe process on it, or is that going to be an appliance?
It's probably, well, I'll let you answer that question.
That's an area of investigation.
Yeah,
that question is really it's a packaging question of where we run a process, and we could run the process outside of the box, or we could run the communication path between the engine, or what we call the dedupe process, and the core RAID stack. There is a communication mechanism, whether that communication mechanism is between two cores of the same CPU or between two CPUs or over the network. That's a packaging issue. It's not a technology issue.
As a I guess, storage architect, the concern would be depending on where the metadata lives, depending on the intelligence. If you lose the appliance and the storage system's still up, do you still have capability to get to the data?
Yes, the answer is yes.
Yeah, in all cases.
In all cases.
We have it designed for real.
Yeah.
So
In all cases, we don't need
all
the...
follow the files as they move around.
Correct. The information needed to optimize is not needed to read back the data. The data is represented in a form that you can read it back without anything that is required to optimize the data.
The reader is actually a very lightweight.
It's a very lightweight process.
I can attest that is in fact the case. And we've actually, in our initial testing, because we actually bought the Ocarinas before Dell even acquired them, in our initial testing, we actually unplugged the Ocarinas from there, and it was seamless being able to read data right off the servers that were optimized. So.
We had one question over here about.
Yeah, there we go.
More of a question towards the thin provisioning that you were talking about earlier in the slideshow. I know with VMware, whenever you do their thin provisioning, as it grows, even if it shrinks back, that thin provisioning doesn't shrink back. How does yours vary from that, or does it?
That's an ongoing development. We continue to work on space reclamation as a part of our thin provisioning capability. Jacob, do you have more? I mean, I think each of our platforms is a little different on that.
There's a standard command that is defined in SCSI that allows an application to indicate back to the block stores that a given chunk of blocks are being freed up. All our controllers support it. The application support, the file system support for that varies, and I think it's now supported on, I'm not sure exactly what OSs support it. Once they support it, then it's a question of just connecting the dots where it says when they have to issue the command, and we have to receive it and then free up the space. So I'm not sure exactly what host platforms do they support it, but on our controller side, we actually do support the functionality where if the host supports the ability to send us the command saying, hey, we've just freed up the space, we will reclaim that space and then give it back to the free space pool from which we allocate when we need more storage.
Would it be something that you could maybe do in a client?
You can, it's a SCSI command, so...
Well, I mean, as far as if you guys were to
Can we write a separate client?
client
See,
or something like that, or?
yes, you could. The answer is, for example, if you're NTFS, we could write a client that basically says what is used and what is not used. But the answer is eventually all file systems are going to support this, right? I think there's work in Linux community who will support this. I don't know where they are with it. Eventually, a lot of the applications that write directly to raw blocks, not going through a file system, they're also going to support this. So the issue is, well, how many of these applications that we do go raw do we actually support? It's like we have to go write plugins for every application, understand the data layouts. When they free up space, they have to tell us so that we can free up space. So I know that there are some companies that, in the absence of this unmapped special plugins for NTFS, but eventually this is just going to be, the hosts are going to support it. Now it's a question of the array supporting it. There are issues on the array side. People are not very flexible with it, and provisioning will have challenges in supporting this. But our arrays basically support the feature to free up space. I know that some host platforms support it today. I just don't know what that list is.
VMware is one of them. Though.
VMware is one.
I think we have a real solid relationship with VMware and those kinds of APIs. We've actually helped them develop some of those APIs, and I believe we already have that capability there in Ecologic at least.
Hopefully on the Ecologic side, the firmware will resolve some of those issues. But right now, if you were to remove some space from a volume, let's say, you have to actually take the volume offline before you can issue that command to reclaim that space.
Yeah.
So it's not a simple process.
Well, I think what Mike said is with VMware, I think that process is going to be inline where we actually free up the space, which is the command is sent by the plugin inline.